Hello everyone, this is our dear from Advanced Mechanics and welcome to another episode of Know Your Car. So in this week's episode, I'm going to be talking about a specific component that is responsible for transferring the twisting force or the torque generated by the engine to the transmission, or gearbox if you may like. The introduction of this component in the automotive industry has made driving a vehicle way much easier, and it allows smooth transmission of the power generated by the engine to the gearbox or transmission. So please make sure you watch this video to the end, and as always, without any waste of time, let's get into the video. So the component I'm going to be talking about today is called the torque converter. The torque converter is a hydraulic coupling that uses transmission fluid to transfer power from the engine to the transmission. This component replaces the clutch and pressure plate assembly found on manual cars. That's why you can only find this component on automatic transmission cars. It multiplies the torque or the twisting force generated by the engine and transfers it to the transmission. That's why it is called a torque converter, because it converts less torque into a much higher torque. The torque converter is made up of three main parts. There is the impeller that flings the transmission fluid outwards while the engine is running, the turbine that receives this fluid, spins and sends the power to the transmission, and the stator that redirects the transmission fluid returning from the turbine to the impeller to create torque multiplication. And from my opinion, the function of the stator is where the word torque converter was actually derived from, because this is the part that multiplies the torque or converts the torque to a much higher torque. And to be honest guys, explaining the function of the torque converter is very boring, because this will involve me using a lot of terms that might just leave you confused, and I don't want that. I want you guys to learn and to know how your car works. So to explain how the torque converter works, I'm just going to use two fans. So here are two fans that are placed in a face-to-face position. The fan on the left side of the screen is going to be labeled as fan A, and the fan on the right side of the screen is going to be labeled as fan B. So imagine we plug fan A to a power source and turn it on. This will cause fan A to start spinning and blow air straight into the face of fan B. The result of this action will also cause fan B to start spinning, even though fan B is not connected to any power source. Because the blades of fan A are constantly blowing air on the blades of fan B will also start spinning. This is exactly what happens inside the torque converter. Imagine the impeller as fan A and the turbine as fan B. The impeller is always rotating because it's directly connected to the engine. Instead of fan A, which is the impeller blowing air just like in the demonstration, it flings or throws transmission fluid straight into the face of the turbine. And the continuous flinging of this transmission fluid to the turbine causes the turbine to rotate. So the impeller is connected to the engine and the turbine is connected to the transmission. And of which we are all aware that the transmission is connected to the wheels, right? But then you might ask, where is the starter? The starter is positioned in between the impeller and the turbine, and its function is to redirect the fluid from the turbine to the impeller. Because what happens is that once this fluid is thrown straight to the turbine, some of that fluid is lost. But the starter collects that fluid and returns it back into the impeller. And this is where the torque multiplication happens, or torque converting, because once that fluid is returned to the impeller, it is thrown back to the turbine and torque is multiplied. So that's how a torque converter works, and I hope the illustrations helped you in understanding how this component works. The torque converter is located between the engine and the transmission inside the bell housing of an automatic transmission car. Now you know how the torque converter works. What are some of the problems that can characterize a failing torque converter? So one thing you have to know is that these components don't usually fail. In most cases, these components will outlive your engine. But in very rare cases, here are some of the problems that can characterize a failing torque converter. You might hear unusual noises coming from beneath your car. You may experience poor acceleration. Your transmission may start to overheat and even vibrate when accelerating. And sometimes a bad torque converter may trigger an engine check light to illuminate on your dashboard.